With me today is Allan Evans, CEO of Unusual Machines. How do you handle risk?
You have to take risks. But when you're a small company, you absolutely have to guess and go. People very often aren't willing to take the risk because they're worried about failure. Once you discover what it is, you now have to focus on just what it is.
What makes a great leader?
The really good leaders I see.
And welcome everyone to another Smart Money Circle episode. I'm Adam Sarhan. With me today is Allan Evans, CEO of Unusual Machines, ticker symbol UMAC. Allan, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome to the Smart Money Circle.
Thanks, Adam. I'm excited to be here.
Likewise. So, Allan, we always like to begin. Can you please tell us your story and how you got to where you are today?
Well, it was a cold, dark. No, I was engineering student. When I was a kid, I built computers, so I ended up going into engineering. I got my PhD in electrical engineering, doing MEMS, so like the small sensor stuff. Ended up starting a company as a technology transfer out of National Lab. Was in Silicon Valley doing VR headsets. Company called Avegant, so raised some money from Intel Capital, some other places. Ended up going over to China all the time to build factories, to build production for VR headsets. While over there, ended up becoming the CEO of a company called Fat Shark, which does or did all the goggles for drone racing. So first-person view goggles. So if you've seen drone racing on TV, or more recently, if you've seen the people wearing goggles in the conflict in Ukraine, et cetera, we built a whole bunch of those. And then in COVID, we sold that into Red Cat Holdings, where I was the COO. They're on the NASDAQ, and we uplisted and then went and acquired Teal Drones. I helped build the factory to do US drones in Salt Lake City. And then about a year ago, took over as the CEO of Unusual Machines, and we listed it. So that's the quick story. There's a lot of fun lessons in there. Maybe
Wow,
vignettes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I said there are a lot of vignettes, obviously, in there, but
Absolutely love it. So let's talk about the business. Please tell us what Unusual Machine does, some of your competitive advantages, and all that fun stuff.
yeah, Unusual Machines has a retail part where we sell first-person view, like hobbyist parts, into the US, drone parts. We realized about a year ago we're selling a lot of drone parts, and coming from Red Cat, we realized there aren't a lot of drone parts made in the US. So we've been working on onshoring the production of drone parts for other drone companies, additionally to our channel. And then very recently, we announced the acquisition of Aloft, which whenever anybody goes and flies, they have to register with the FAA. And before you fly, they do about 70% of those registrations. And they also do airspace management. So if you're a city manager and you're in the police, you can see where the firefighters are, where the hospitals are, where the individuals are flying. So there's the deployment of this will stop that New Jersey drone problem in the future. Right. And so we're trying to really do some of the American pieces of the drone industry that aren't the drones themselves to really help out the drone manufacturers.
Wow, that makes perfect sense. So anyone else that does this that's publicly traded?
Not really. You have some individual component providers. So like Mobilicom's publicly traded. They do radios, particularly the radio link. But really, we realized a whole bunch of people are trying to go do the air vehicles. And like the parts are kind of boring, right? The sticky stuff in the middle is just not sexy. And so we saw this really big gap, and we're just trying to fill it. And we see the Chinese companies that we're trying to displace that are way ahead as our real competitors. If we can't be a drop-in replacement that's as good at the same price, then we actually haven't achieved anything.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. So let's talk about risk management, Allan. How do you handle risk, and what are some mistakes you see people make with respect to risk management?
You have to take risk. When you're small, and we're small, or when you're a small company, you absolutely have to guess and go. And I think too many people get trapped by what if. So there's a couple of simple things I had heard when I was much younger that stuck with me. The first thing is I can make a decision and go as fast as I can one way and find out I'm wrong and change my mind and go the opposite direction faster than a committee can decide what way to go. And so it's not a risk if you pay attention while you're doing it, or not as much of a risk. And then, the other thing is that I see happen is once something gets really big and the flywheel's spinning and everything's working, you have to very quickly shut off risk. You have to now babysit it because it's there. So I think in the early stages of a new endeavor, people very often aren't willing to take the risk because they're worried about failure, where you're absolutely going to fail. Just accept it and go as fast as you can. But then once it's working, you have to completely change your your risk attitude to no, babysit this flywheel and then go put the risk, move the risk to some other entity, and have these people be very, you know, uh, very detailed, very specific, and very babysitting what is going on. So I think
Gotcha.
people are not risk forward enough, and then are too risk forward, and it's you have to be extremely risk taking and then extremely not risk taking, and there's got to be a very sharp line there.
I love that. So when you just to clarify there, early on you go faster. If you're going the wrong way, great, you can pivot and just go a different direction until you hit your mark. And then you're saying once you hit your mark, you want to dial back that risk so you don't overdo it and blow up, so to speak. Or can you clarify that point, please?
Yeah, I think there's some companies that have done a very good job. Let's take Google because you can go back in time. They were
Mm.
figuring out search and they were trying all this different stuff and they were doing everything. And then suddenly AdWords worked. And that's when Eric Schmidt came in and he's like, look, go do whatever, founders, go figure out Android. Like, we need to babysit the crap out of AdWords and turn it into this flywheel that works, and like do the nuance there and not take risks with search or AdWords, not suddenly change the homepage, not change how everybody engages, but instead just dial it in and then iterate and really perfect it. And I think that's the change you see is like once you discover what it is, you now have to focus on just what it is. And so a lot of people still want to go in 10 different directions. You're like, stop, go this one direction. And I think that's a transition state that a lot of companies have trouble with.
Wow, I love that. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So thank you for clarifying. It's as you're in that discovery phase, it's different from the execution phase. So once you discover what works, stay focused on what works. You can keep doing other things, but make sure what works works. So that grows and it continues to fund all the other stuff, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I think about it like a flywheel. Like this whole time you're trying to get a flywheel spinning.
Yeah,
Once it's spinning, babysit it. Like
gotcha.
keep adding energy to the flywheel.
Yep. And inertia is the hardest part. Getting that first move, that snowball down the mountain, the first or the flywheel going, that first push is the hardest. So just do that. And then once that's going, just keep it going. I get that. Makes perfect sense. Okay.
Yeah.
What are some timeless lessons you've learned along the way that you'd like to share with the audience?
Hire slowly. I mean that I think that's the most important one. What we do to this date is basically everyone you're going to work with has a chance to sit down, meet with you, do everything. If anybody says no, we don't hire. Doesn't matter what it looks like on paper. Tend to find aptitude and personality matches over experience. I found that people with the right aptitudes and the right attitudes can very often get stuff done, regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of anything else. You're like, oh man, they're perfect for it. They might not know it, but they're perfect for it. You know, they get along with everybody, so they make it work. I think that one's really important. Uh, Another one that we try to do that I've found works really well, and my COO calls this sort of race car operations. We we go as fast as we can all the time, but then I require about once a year everybody to take 10 consecutive days off where they don't check email or do anything else.
Love
So
it.
you and I do the same thing. I take 10 consecutive days off at least once a year. And where that full disconnect lets you come back totally refreshed to whatever you're doing. And I think encouraging that behavior is really positive. And then it it solves the redundancy problem that where everybody's like, well, what if you get hit by a bus? Well, that's morbid. That's
Yeah.
dark and stupid. It's more like everybody, you need to take vacation. So be sure that it's okay for you to take vacation and it doesn't fall apart. So that I think has been something that's really effective for what we do for keeping people really engaged and preventing burnout.
I love that. Do you take off, I guess, weekly or quarterly as well, or encourage people like every Sunday you're off or whatever, 1 day a week or 2 days a week, or is it just, hey, go, 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 and then stop?
So my wife has a rule. I have to take a day off a week. So
Okay.
I take a day off a week, and focus. But I think in that case, everybody's got to manage it for themselves. Different
Yep.
people have different personal contexts, but it's really, I find that you don't disconnect all the way and understand and remember that like you typically like what you do and the
Yeah.
people you do it with and sort of separate from the obnoxious day to day until
Yeah.
about 10 days in. Like 4 or 5 days in, you're not there yet. You're still, and suddenly you're like, oh, come back and you're like, all right, I'm ready to get back to work.
Yeah.
So
And then
I think that's, yeah,
yeah.
good.
I was gonna say you come back even stronger, like you're ready, you recharge, and you're more.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're less cranky. Like people after a while, they can be a little bit. I'm the most guilty of this. I become cranky bear. You're just like a little ornery, a little less optimistic. So I think that time off is important as a reset and to do it structurally.
I love that. Okay, let's talk about the flip side of that. What are some timeless mistakes that either you've made or you see people make, and how do you avoid them?
Oh man. So there's different leadership styles, obviously. And I think early in my career, I led in what I call a prophet style. Like, I can see the future. We're going this way. Follow me. No questions. Um,
Oh, you're
that
saying
doesn't,
prophet like a Jesus or Muhammad or
yeah,
Moses,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like,
not
oh,
prophet like
like,
funny prophet. I thought you were
yeah,
saying
yeah.
make.
Like, no, no,
Okay,
no. Like tech visionary. Like,
got it, got it.
we're,
Okay,
this is the future. We're going to do it. And, no room for sort of questioning. Like, we're all going. And now I find that the communication matters a whole lot more. Like, we're going this way, but here's why. Da 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 da. And then with that why, people are just as passionate about it. They're just as fervent about what you're trying to do. But then they come in with suggestions, or they make these what I call red or blue decisions. Like, what color should we paint it? Red or blue? It costs nothing. But if our corporate colors are blue, paint it blue, right? And so when people understand the why, and I feel like I almost over communicate the why and take in this feedback. It makes all these zero cost decisions align with the objective. Where with a little less communication before, because it didn't feel like we had the time to spend to communicate it all. Um, I realized that ended up slowing us down. So I think that was a mistake I'd made early in my career, that I now definitely see the benefits of being like, hold on, here's why. Feel free to ask why. All right, and then do that. The other thing I think, and this is something that Bezos is famous for, is m- meetings are a waste of time. Like, uh, small groups are great for alignment, or big meetings for communication, but if you have a committee decide a thing, you're paying 8 people to do one person's job. So don't do that. Like, give somebody, individuals, both authority and autonomy, along with the resources to go solve the problem. And I think in larger organizations, there are too many stakeholders. Even in small organizations, you sometimes get too many stakeholders, and it's important not to do that. So, one of the things, I came out of product because I'm a technical, so I try very hard never to go interfere with the product process. Right? Like, I want to go in and be like, oh yeah, we should put the props here, the motors here. We should do a drone like this, and it'd just be so destructive. Instead of being like, this is your job, here's the timeline, here are the resources, ask me if you need anything, but don't let me touch it.
right. Yeah,
And empower people to do that. So I think really it's the mechanism of empowering people that can help you be a lot more efficient and go a lot faster, or not. And I see a lot of people are in that or not category, where you have 8 people in a room to discuss something. Unless it's trade-offs that matter to the end result, why are 8 people in a room discussing it?
makes perfect sense. So that's a perfect segue to my next question about leadership and what makes a great leader, and then what are some of the best lessons you've learned about leadership or mistakes that leaders make and how to avoid them. Anywhere you want to go in that world, please.
Well, I hope to be one day. So I'll let you know what I see in people that I think exhibit the tendencies I personally wish I had. I think communication is probably the number one skill, and not engaging in the act of communicating, but sort of being a chameleon. So, different people have their own innate form of communication, and the really good leaders I see adapt their communication style to the listener. And so they're able to talk to each person in a way that they can hear it, or communicate in a way that they can hear it. And that sort of chameleon communication ability is a really surprisingly common trait I see amongst people that are really successful. Is they can sort of relate and bring the not just the a high level, but the spirit of why, or the vision, to somebody in a way where it really registers for them, and they don't force people to come communicate in their style. I think that's the first one. I think an open-mindedness is important. So being able to hear things, and take it back in. Most of the best leaders I know are pretty quick to be like, "Whew, I screwed that up," or "I'm sorry," or "I was wrong." And there's a humanity to it. There's not like there's absolutely an ego. So I don't know how to say that it's low ego, because the
Right.
best leaders are proud people, right? Like you can't have the conviction to go do new things without feeling pretty good about yourself, without having pride,
Hmm.
without aspects of an ego. But so it's people that have that pride, but don't let their ego get in the way of what we're trying to do as a group. And I
Got
think
it.
that's people say low ego, and I sometimes just think, no, no, I want somebody who believes in themselves. I want somebody who is a proud person. I want somebody who knows they're really good at something, but can be like, yeah, I screwed that up, or oh man, that's an even better idea.
Got
So
it. Yeah.
I think it's that nuance that I think is more important than just being like, oh, they're low ego. That's
Right.
gibberish.
Yeah, that is gibberish. I get that 100%. It's almost being self-aware to the point where you're aware the ego's there, and you almost see it from like a third person objectively, and then interact with it and deal with it and put it in check when it needs to be in check, and so on and so forth. Is that
Yeah, and bring
correct?
it out when you need people to get in line,
Right.
right? Because I agree, self-awareness is probably the best way to describe it. Any company, any endeavor, we're all on a rowboat, and the whatever it is, the leader is at the front of the rowboat, and it doesn't matter how good the individuals are at rowing. If everybody rows to go together, the rowboat's going to go somewhere and go somewhere quickly. And so people are always like this or this or this. I'm like, look, we can all argue about where to go, but when we get in the rowboat, everybody rowed the same,
Right.
right? Like,
Yep.
I don't care how good you are as an individual contributor, like, that's awesome, but we're all on the same boat. So
Row.
I think and
Yeah,
like row
row.
at the cadence,
Exactly. Right.
and there's a certain agreement or a certain understanding that that's how this all works for people to be successful, that I think is really is where that effectiveness is, and the self-awareness and the awareness to go have the fight, be honest, but yet come back and go do something that is the outcome of the group, is what I think is really important. And I even subject myself to that. Like I said, I let everybody in leadership sit down and have time with people that we're maybe going to bring in. If I'm really keen on somebody, but somebody says no, we don't hire them,
Oh
right?
wow.
And that's like I don't shove my executive privilege down people's throats very often. Like if there's a framework, I might be like, are you sure? I can double check, I can see how strong the conviction is, but if the conviction's there, then we don't do it. And I think it's those sorts of things where uh, you really see the groups of people that's lives are involved be the most effective, right?
Yeah.
The effectiveness of a leader is not measured in what they do individually, but how effectively they work with the amount of resources they have relative to expectation. And the
Yeah.
people that are the best at getting everybody in the boat to row the same way tend to be the most effective.
Got it. No, makes perfect sense. So next question, adversity. How do you handle adversity, and what are some obstacles that you've had to overcome along the way?
Oh goodness, I think it depends on the adversity. You know, anytime you're trying to do this, there's always setbacks. Like, nothing ever goes according to plan. So I think if we start out, and I basically, this is part of why our hiring rule is, anybody we bring in, we're like, look, things aren't going to work out. This is going to get messy. And so the first thing is, can we sit down and collectively solve the problem? You can't let adversity paralyze you. Um, you have to sit down and look at two pieces. How'd you get in the situation? And then how do you get out of the situation? So, getting into the situation, did you misread the market? Did you overspend? Did you make a bad decision? Is that a point where we were going so fast one way, we got to turn around and go the other way? Okay. And I think the nature of that adversity is how you got there. And then what you do coming out is you sit down and you say, what's the next plan? And I think you maintain some adaptability that way.
Got it. No, makes
Uh,
perfect.
I think if you look when we were at Red Cat, this is before UMAC, when we raised money at Teal, we were way up, and then it was 2021, the market goes vanish, right? And so now you have to somehow survive and figure out what you're doing along the way. And I think there's a disassociation you have to have when you face adversity or you make decisions. You work with all these wonderful people, and there's so many lives that are tied up into in endeavor, right? It's not just my employees, but it's their families. It's their I take all that personal interest very seriously because individuals' lives matter a whole lot to them. And so you have to be compassionate and human, but at the same time, you have to be coldly statistical when you're
Hmm.
in leadership and say, okay, we have to cut costs. Okay,
Hmm.
where do we cut costs?
Hmm.
Okay, how do we do this in a way that's fair, but not in a way that it compromises the business? How do we let people go? How do we reduce some of our spend? And so I think you saw coming out of 2021 with I think the stock market crash where you're okay, there was cash in the bank, but maybe not the same access to the capital markets.
Yeah.
And then you're like, all right, we need to get to here. We have this. We don't have any of the added money we might have expected. So now we have to completely replan it. And you have to do it in almost an emotionally disassociative way. But then you have
Mhm.
to execute that plan with a humanity to it. And I think that's pretty much all adversity comes down to is resources and people. And like the adversity means fewer resources, and the challenge is how do you manage that, particularly for the people involved.
I love that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense because there is an element of humanity there. And as a great leader, you've got to make sure you incorporate that so people, you still rally the troops and they still keep rowing, to use your examples. I love that. All right, final
Yeah.
question for you today, Alan, is what's the best piece of advice you'd like to give the audience or your 30-year-old self?
Man, there's so many.
And we'll
I
take them all
think
with thank you. How about
I think don't be afraid. If you have something you're passionate about, or you think you see an opportunity, you have to go after it fearlessly. Absolutely fearlessly. Um, and probably not going to work out, and that's okay. Like if you can internalize and accept it that it will fail unless you go as fast as you can, then you no longer hesitate. You no longer take this thing as a maybe as precious. And so you're then open to making the real decisions you have to make to find success. And so I think there was some hesitance when things were just starting to work when I was 30, where you're like, oh, but this is a pretty good gig now. It's like, do I want to risk it? And I'm like, and then the other piece is, I think, surround yourself with people you want to work your entire career with, because we're not in a one company for life situation anymore. We're in a peer group for life situation. And so somebody you work for might work for you over here or whatever. And so I'd say as you go through a career and you go through this stuff, be sure the people in your orbit are people you'd want to have in your orbit for 40 years. And you'll end up being a lot more successful than otherwise.
I love that. Well, beautiful way to end it. Thank you so much, Alan, for taking the time. Best of luck and success going forward, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon. This was fantastic.
Thanks. I look forward to talking about the next adversity. It'll probably be in a week. And I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your time today.